Channel CEO Roger Ailes made unwanted sexual advances,
calling out Harvey Weinstein for harassment and assault.
Women are making
Kevin
claims
Spacey,
against
the
comedians.
latest high-profile star caught up in allegations.
Candidate in Alabama's Senate
When Trent Franks announcing that he's retiring amid a probe
sexual misconduct.
Hi, my name is Kamala Lopez, and since the documentary Equal Means Equal was released in 2016, there has been a sea change for women. Millions of us stood up in historic protests all over the globe. Powerful men in entertainment, business, and government have been shamed, exposed, and deposed. And all of us found our voice, we're standing up, and we're fighting back. But how do we do it? How do we take this seismic shift for women and make it a reality? Not just redefining her position in society, but her formal standing in our institutions and systems.
The first order of business is to take a realistic look at where American women stand today. Women are now 47% of the American paid workforce. 66 million women are working. But how are they actually doing in the marketplace? Pretty badly. 42 million working women are slipping into poverty with their children, and it's at every level.
Jennifer Lawrence was being paid less than her male co-stars, about 23% difference.
This really is a war against women. You had the attacks on women's reproductive health care, and then you have this onslaught of slashing all these programs that women who are being paid 53 cents to the dollar or 59 cents to the dollar or 77 cents to the dollar who can't catch a break.
Most women I knew weren't looking to catch a break. In fact, if they weren't making it, they figured it was their fault. Women are still making between 22 and 46% less money than men are, adjusted for their race.
I think it's a wake-up call to the United States that 1 in 3 working women in this country are in economic peril.
Bloomberg analyzed U.S. Census data and found that median earnings for women were lower than those for men in 99.6% of all major occupation categories. Whatever the reasons, the overall effect of this economic bias is that across the country, women were living on the edge.
The war on women, I think now, it's evolved to forcing women to exist within a really fantastical narrative, which is that we can have it all. We can have jobs. Well, we have to have jobs now. If you want to have kids, you better be working. Maybe you'll need 2 jobs.
In terms of pay equity, we are going backwards. The pay gap hasn't really changed in a decade. And it'll go up a penny, down a penny, but that is because men are losing pay, not because women are gaining.
I don't think men are properly compensated, you know what I mean? For the most part, I mean, you know, there's that small microcosm of the community, that small portion that's overly compensated, and then there's the rest of us. And women fall even beneath that.
The thesis of this film is that we must start from the law and move forward from there. Law gives us the strong underlying foundation that we need to bring our society up to date with the new reality of women's roles and positions. And we must start from our most basic and foundational law, the Constitution.
Most women in this country believe in general they're protected under the Constitution, and that is not the reality.
Well, that's just if you read the Constitution, you can see it says all men are created equal, not all human beings, not all women and men.
Even though the vast majority of Americans think women have equal rights under the Constitution, they don't.
How is it that one minority group, which we're not really a minority because in numbers we are a majority, but how come after 40 years we still don't have the Equal Rights Amendment, and it's still okay in a way to discriminate against women?
Most economists and sociologists say that you need a 30% floor to really have an impact. I think we have our work cut out for us.
If you don't have people making the key decisions about culture, media, politics, religion, you can't change things.
Well, how do we change things if we have no power?
A constitutional amendment is a guarantee. You have a bad election, they can't take away your rights.
It's the guarantee from one generation to the next. Women don't have that.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
I don't know what the ERA is.
Error average. Error, I don't know.
Some thought it was a brand of laundry detergent endorsed by my pal Chuck Norris. But most?
That's a good question. I have no idea.
I think it's on the older feminists. We didn't tell our story. We were so upset and hurt when the ERA did not pass. We all went home and sat down and cried. But we didn't tell the story.
In the original Constitution, they purposely excluded women. That's the history. We can deny that it existed, but it did.
This Constitution was written at a time when we had slavery, and the status of wives, the legal status of wives, was the model for the legal status of slaves, because we were chattel.
The reality is you couldn't own property, you couldn't vote, you couldn't, you were essentially the possession of your father until you married.
There were many brave people sheltering slaves on the Underground Railway. But when Susan B. Anthony and other women sheltered runaway wives, then some of the abolitionists themselves, the men said, now you're going too far. They really do belong to their husbands.
The new 14th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote regardless of race, but only for men. Black women, and all women, were not given voting rights. It also added the word male into our Constitution for the first time. But women had a long, hard fight ahead of them, jailed, beaten, and force-fed just to get the vote in 1920. Then, suffragist Alice Paul proposed ending inequality in one fell swoop by adding a few choice words to the U.S. Constitution to protect and include women.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
The ERA was introduced in every congressional session starting in 1923 with no success. It was only voted on 3 times in 49 years. Then, in 1970, members of the newly formed National Organization for Women stormed Capitol Hill, demanding the ERA be heard by the full Congress.
We are people who are fighting for our very economic survival.
Congress agreed to vote. It passed with flying colors in both houses. President Nixon endorsed it. The ERA was sent to the 50 states for approval. 38 were needed to make it law. In the first year alone, 30 states ratified the ERA. Presidents Ford and Carter supported it, the United Auto Workers endorsed it, and Hollywood loved it. But the movement stalled in the southern states, where the strong influence of the growing moral majority created a culture war, the echoes of which last to this very day. When the deadline came in 1979, 35 states had ratified the ERA, 3 states short.
Because I was around when the ERA wasn't ratified. Because of toilets.
Talk about ironic. To avoid sharing toilets, women lost equal rights under the law. The scare tactics successfully distracted the public from the real issues, such as equal pay, job discrimination, and violence. Congress extended the ratification deadline until June 13th of 1982, but
time ran out for the Equal Rights Amendment today. The 24-word statement pledging equality for women under the Constitution fell 3 states short of ratification.
National polls have always showed a majority of Americans favored ERA.
Until then, the ERA had never been a partisan issue. Both parties historically had supported it.
ERA supporters say they will try again, but even they aren't saying when.
Well, I'll say it. Now! The time has clearly arrived. The ERA is more important today than it has ever been. Let's take a look at a recent case between one of the biggest corporations in the world and 1.5 million women who went up against it alleging gender discrimination.
The Walmart case was the largest civil rights employment case in history.
If you can pay a woman 10 to 20 to 30% less than a man,
then that's a huge savings to a company.
Walmart is the #1 private employer in the United States of America, with 1.3 million employees and 11,000 stores.
In 2017, Walmart posted $481 billion in sales.
Betty Dukes was the first Walmart female worker to file a lawsuit charging Walmart with gender discrimination.
I believe that there was a pattern of discrimination at Walmart.
When the case was filed, women hourly workers earned about $1,100 less per year than their male counterparts.
And the gender pay gap among management was about $14,500 per year.
Jennifer Reich was on the team of attorneys taking on Walmart on behalf of the women.
What it is about is the systematic discrimination against women at Walmart in pay and promotions, which often go hand in hand. So women are being paid less for doing the same jobs as men, and they're being excluded and discriminated against in getting and retaining positions of authority and leadership in the company. We're not talking about a glass ceiling here, we're talking about a brick wall.
This case is already 11 years in the making. Court after court after court has actually ruled in favor of the women, but Walmart has kept fighting it all the way up.
Walmart scored a big victory today when the Supreme Court threw out the largest sex discrimination case in U.S. history.
It's very hard to prove state of mind. It's why we lost Walmart, for instance, as the biggest sex discrimination suit in history. We couldn't prove they intended to do it.
We wouldn't have to prove intent if they treated women like they treat other discriminated against groups who receive strict scrutiny under the law.
When federal courts decide whether the Constitution has been violated, they do it by evaluating what the government has done under a test, a standard of review. Strict scrutiny that is used in race cases is the gold standard in constitutional law. It basically says when government uses race-based classifications, we're very uncomfortable with that.
Gender doesn't make that cut at all.
Race, religion, and national origin are all considered suspect classes. That is, groups that have historically been discriminated against.
In the area of sex discrimination, the Supreme Court has not been willing to scrutinize sex-based classifications under that high level of protection. Instead, the Supreme Court has created a sort of special intermediate test, for women.
Sex or gender is the only class that falls under intermediate scrutiny. Pretty convenient. Why? Oh, well, let's see how intermediate scrutiny plays out.
When strict scrutiny is applied, the litigant has an 80% chance of winning. When intermediate scrutiny is applied, the litigant alleging sex discrimination has a 50-50 chance of winning. So that is, they're just as likely to win as they are to lose.
The Supreme Court ruled unanimously today that the lawsuit against Walmart stores cannot proceed as a class action.
We have decision after decision coming down from the Supreme Court that seem to indicate that the problem is people using the laws too much. That we need to somehow make it harder for people to get to their day in court, rather than make the laws actually work for people.
It was simply too many women with too many different accusations. Justice Scalia called it unbelievable.
Justice Scalia said, I love this, despite statistical and anecdotal evidence. I only got my law degree watching Law and Order, but isn't statistical and anecdotal evidence another word for evidence?
A lot of people do not realize that Eugene Scalia law firm is the one that represented Walmart at the Supreme Court. That's Antonio Scalia's son.
I'm really lost here. Do American women have protection from discrimination in the workplace or not?
I happen to believe we have protections under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
We have a body of law that has been cobbled together derivatively using the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, its Equal Protection Clause, to grant us certain rights.
And those incremental pieces of legislation are the foundation of the modern women's rights movement.
Title VII is our main employment discrimination law.
And on paper,
Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 bars all discrimination in employment, including hiring, firing, and promotion. But
the number one workplace problem that women still face is harassment because of their sex.
So obviously it's not working. Why?
There are no teeth to it. It actually makes better business sense for businesses to ignore it because the few times they get caught, the penalties are very small.
I decided to talk to Lisa, one of my friends from Yale who went on to work on Wall Street.
You know, they can always say it's something else. And in my business, you don't usually fight them on it because it's a losing battle in a man's world right now. You know, you might win a lawsuit, but you never work again.
The employment guarantee, which actually was passed in '64, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, is just a statute, and it's been reinterpreted. In fact, just a little bit ago, just a few years ago, the court gutted it in what was called Lilly Ledbetter case.
At the trial, the jury found that Goodyear had discriminated against me in violation of Title VII. The Supreme Court took it all away.
It was always interpreted Title VII meant that if you got a discriminatory paycheck, in other words, you were being paid less than a man simply because you were a woman, and you could prove it, that was a violation of Title VII. Then came the brilliant Supreme Court majority, and it said, oh, wait a minute. Title VII meant that you really only had 180 days to file the case from the day you were hired.
But where'd they come up with that?
Because there is an 180-day clause in it, but that's on the basis of a discriminatory act. In other words, if you now know you've been discriminated against and it just happened, even though you were hired maybe 10 years previously, you could still file. But they said, no, it has to be from the day that you were hired, from your first paycheck.
But what if you don't know it?
Oh, guess what? Lilly Ledbetter didn't know it for 29 years, and they ruled against her. She won in the lower court because it was always interpreted that each paycheck was a discriminatory act and that it could not only go forward, but it could go back from the beginning of that discrimination, right? Yes. No, they came along and said it had to be 180 days from the day you were hired. So they gutted the act. That, you know what I mean by gutted the act? They kept it on the ball, on the record, but it doesn't mean anything. Because in the first 6 months, you can hardly find the bathroom, let alone that you've been discriminated against. We had to go back to Congress to pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was the first act signed by President Obama to correct that Supreme Court decision. That's what we've been doing for 40 years. You pass a law, then they gut it, then you have to reinstate it.
So basically, Title VII is legal Swiss cheese. Tell me we have something else.
We have a federal statute, the Equal Pay Act. It requires equal pay for equal work. But what if you're comparing a secretary at a school with a custodian?
Why right now, parking lot attendants, who are mostly male, make more than childcare attendants, who are mostly female. Not because we care more about our cars than about our children, but because one group is overwhelmingly female and the other is overwhelmingly male.
All of our civil rights laws are flawed. They're what we call complaint-driven. They do not compel an employer to do anything except sit back and wait to get sued. What the law says is discrimination is prohibited. It doesn't say you must pay women and men the same, for example, or promote women in the same numbers. How does that translate? The woman has to prove that she was discriminated against. The corporation doesn't have to do a darn thing, but let its lawyers drag things through the courts for 10 years or more.
Now, in order to prove discrimination, even if you apply the 14th Amendment to sex discrimination, which is extremely rare, you have to prove that the person intended to discriminate.
The dean of the Supreme Court says he believes in the original intent and that women, there is no guarantee against discrimination nor protection for women.
When Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was asked whether we were in error using the 14th Amendment to protect women from sex discrimination, he said yes.
Applying
Yes.
to both sex discrimination?
Sorry to tell you that.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to hear whatever you have to
if
say.
indeed the current society has come to different views, that's fine. Certainly, the Constitution does not require sexual discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. Nobody ever thought that that's what it meant. Nobody ever voted for that.
Sorry, but we didn't have the vote at that point.
I wasn't very surprised. This is the most corporate court that we have ever had. These judges will pick a corporation over an individual anytime. We saw that in the Ledbetter case. We saw it in the Walmart case.
Did you know that under U.S. law, corporations qualify as people? In 1886, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment was found to protect corporations. So, the 14th Amendment protects corporate people, but not female people. And that is why basic civil and human rights for women must be guaranteed by the Constitution.
You're being told that if you just work hard enough, just like a man, you can get everything you need. But, you know, as you and I know, as you've been seeing all across the country, we're not equal citizens for all intents and purposes.
The expectations of what they're going to do on the home front haven't changed that much. Meanwhile, there's a whole new set of expectations on the work front, so they're doing double time, and they're just exhausted.
It's an internal fight that you have to, a lot of cognitive dissonance you have to experience as a modern woman. You have to tell yourself, well, I have it all now, I can work free, but at state level, at the federal level, and in your own office, you're not recognized as equal.
The women who are being college educated, many of them are coming from, I won't say privileged backgrounds, but at least comfortable backgrounds. They don't necessarily see themselves as being oppressed. So it's not a personal issue with them. I need to go and fix something because I'm being oppressed. They need to be educated about the history of the movement and about what's going on elsewhere in the world.
If women would score it, if they would vote against anyone who does not go on the Equal Rights Amendment and use their vote, you'd see so many people go on that amendment so fast. Really, a democracy works, and when a democracy speaks, people react.
I believe it's the right time, but I also believe we're going to do it. It's only a matter of time, but only if we get mad and only if we start knowing what the truth is.
The Equal Rights Amendment would improve life for women and men in many, many, many countless specific ways.
It's not a women's rights amendment, but it's an equal rights amendment so that men would benefit from these laws, especially when it comes to their private lives involving their families and their children.
The most important thing that we'll do, it will set the principle in stone, and then it will be a starting point.
People will say, well, but whether or not we have the Equal Rights Amendment, there's still sexual oppression. Of course, there are still murders. Every civilized society has some type of law or practice that outlaws murder. And yet murder takes place. We didn't eliminate bigotry when the Civil Rights Act was passed. We simply said, as a society, we're no longer going to tolerate that kind of behavior.
Whether it's the high school team getting Title IX funds, adequate uniform and support for travel, whether it's the rape victim who expects to have a rape kit tested.
The presence of an ERA significantly increases the likelihood of a court applying a higher standard of review, which in turn significantly increases the likelihood of a decision that favors the litigant who's alleging sex discrimination. That's very, very important and valuable.
Dr. King once said that we're all tied together in a single garment of destiny. And he went on to say that we are interdependent and we're interconnected. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Until women have an even playing field, the nation has not lived up to its high creeds.
The Equal Rights Amendment is one line. It's a very simply phrased piece of legislation. And so the question then comes in, why wouldn't you go ahead and have something that declares gender or sex equality?
I think that it's going to require a new dedicated civil rights movement led by women and our allies to take control of to reframe the debate. The majority of parents in America are single mothers. We know that the majority of people on college campuses getting their degrees are women. How much longer can that system, population-wise, really exist with the current laws that are in place? We have to start honoring women and honoring the contribution that we make, which is a contribution that still does the majority of labor inside and outside of the house. We have to start recognizing the disparity. That isn't attacking men. That isn't attacking people born male. It's recognizing the reality that we live in. The reality that you live in is that women are the wheels on which this society moves. We're the caretakers, we're teaching your children, we're taking care of you in the hospital, we're holding your hand while you die. And we can't really seem to break out of this pink-collar ghetto. We have to reclaim the amount of power that we actually have in this society, that we exert every day by keeping it running.
Right now, there's a tacit understanding that the law is there to be twisted. We have a clear mandate to change federal law. The Equal Rights Amendment is a matter of principle. It's who we are as a nation, and it's what we believe. Our mothers, and their mothers, and the mothers before them started a revolution. Let's finish it. Let's ratify the Equal Rights Amendment now.
Daughters and sisters, mothers and wives, every woman in every walk of life.
No ceiling can stop us, we're not here to ask. It's time, we're here to shatter that glass.
We made a resolution
to amend the Constitution and ratify the ERA. Oh yeah, we can do it. 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 Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. The future is in our head.
What's it gonna take for these 24 words to be the law of the land for every woman and girl?
We've come a long way, but not far enough. And we're never, ever, ever gonna give up.
Gotta finish what we started.
It's not too late. Together we will find a way. Oh yeah, we can do it. 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 Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. The future is in our head. ERA, ERA, ratify the ERA, 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 ratify the ERA.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States